Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
Coming to you live from the hipster haven of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and New Jersey, which is where 30-somethings go when they've given up. This is Open Market with Joe Zappa and Eric Franchi. How's it going,
I like
Eric?
to call it New Jersey, the land of pizza and biceps.
I mean, really a cousin to both of the lands where we grew up in
Yes, sir.
Staten Island and Long Island.
Yes, sir. Speaking of biceps, how's the bulk going?
I am finally cutting. Yeah, I told Eric I was on a permanent bulk, but I went to the park on Memorial Day weekend and I was like, these hipsters are pretty ripped and I need to keep up with them. So
How do you change your workout? What's the workout?
I'm not changing the workout so much. I mean, I was doing a strength workout for a long time and now I'm doing more hypertrophy, but mainly I'm just eating like 2,000 calories a day instead of like 3,000. And 3,000 is probably generous because really I was just eating whatever I wanted.
Got it. Okay. Well, we've just lost all of our listeners.
Well, our listeners are probably well immersed in the lexicon of lifting, but I was getting dinner with someone and she was like, what is cutting? And I was like, oh, it's a term men use for dieting, so they still feel cool.
I didn't think of, cutting could have a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Good clarification. Anyway, what's on docket for this week?
Today's topic is what makes a great AdTech CEO? And where I thought we could start is thinking about what defines greatness in AdTech. You want to start there?
Greatness in AdTech. Well, what's greatness for a CEO, right? From an operator and investor standpoint, I'm thinking that someone who has built and run a successful company, right? So success, we might think about this as, they are a category leader. They've built a large business in terms of revenue. They had a successful outcome in terms of exit, whether that's strategic M&A or IPO. They built an all-star team that's gone on to do great things. The company has outlasted them personally in terms of, just having legacy, good NPS, right, for the company, for the CEO, sort of rattling off the top of my head. That's what I think like a greatness in a CEO is. And then greatness for AdTech, I might just overlay, they built a foundational company, right? AdTech, it's 2 decades old. So as an industry, it's still relatively young. And AdTech really, you would argue is more like 15 years old, with the advent of data, programmatic, all that stuff really being, 2009, 2010, right? So we're in an area where foundational infrastructure, foundational companies are being built. So, I would say that they've either kind of built one of those or run one of those at scale. And they're two different things.
Yeah. So if we think about those three things, it's like financial results or outcomes, right? So IPO or exit. NPS is essentially a stand-in for reputation with customers. So quality of product or service. And then team, which is your ability to attract great people. And so if we work backwards from there, when we think about what makes a great CEO, we're looking for someone who understands product and how to be customer centric and create a product or iterate on a product that customers really love. Someone who can be a magnet for talent, which is the team part, and keep talent. And then the third is sales, financial outcomes, operations. And obviously you might not always get that in one person. Often that's going to come across a team of, 2 or 3. And then as the company evolves, several people. But I think that's a pretty good starting point. And then maybe we could think about some of the examples of people in AdTech who have achieved that.
Brand is important, right? So it's a brand that is everlasting. Maybe the brand has been long sunsetted by the acquirer if it was a strategic exit, but it's a brand that, everybody will recognize. So, all right, let's run down a list of, who would come to mind for a great AdTech CEO in no particular order. Jeff Green, Brian O'Kelly, Jonah Goodhart, Orrin Hoffman, Michael Barrett, Mike Cassidy, Mark Zagorski. The interesting thing, if you go at the beginning of that list, a lot of those folks, they don't even need a last name, right? Like Jonah.
Yeah, that's sort of the ultimate echelon of ad tech CEO / entrepreneurs when you reach the point where people just refer to you by your first name.
I don't hear too much Jeff for Jeff Green.
There might just be too many Jeffs. Though I don't know. There are some people who would. He also has the monosyllabic first and last name thing, so it's fast to just get it out there. But I think one thing about these people that immediately stands out to me, I mean, not all of them, but almost all of them, they either have built a personal brand and they're sort of public facing, or at least have been at some point in their lives, or at least like they're synonymous with their companies and they clearly really believe in the brand of the company. That's one thing that occurs to me off the bat.
It comes with success, right? So, we know their names because they've built, again, those sort of kind of foundational companies when we think about, just the infrastructure for this industry. But then, number two, they then became synonymous at times with the company, at times with the category that they created, right? So a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this pod in terms of just, the GTM and the higher order goals, like, you can draw a straight line to some of these folks that are undoubtedly like the best of the best. They lived it and they're real examples.
Some of these people are founder CEOs. Some of them are hired guns. How do you think about the difference there in terms of what those people tend to bring to the table and what makes someone great at one thing versus another?
I mean, you're either a founder or you're not, right? Like you either revel in this idea of 0 to 1 and building a category and building a company from day zero and, want to go through all of the stuff that you go through, good and bad, scaling a company, or you're an executive that operates at scale and brings a systems approach. And, you don't even look for opportunities unless this is a company that is, $100 million company with a shot of, being a $1 billion outcome. This industry has both of those. It's a good thing because oftentimes the founders that get you to, 0 to 1 to 50 bring in outside talent to ultimately drive towards a successful outcome. So people like Michael Barrett and Mark Zagorski, again, those are sort of two names of those who I would point to as these just like serial CEOs at scale. They tend to come in when a company is at a certain stage and things have been not only de-risked, but there's a clear opportunity here to build something special. And they've done it again and again.
I've worked with both types. Something I see in hired gun CEOs that I really appreciate is that systematic way of thinking. They have a very professional air about them, I think, where the talent around them can see that. I think they tend to be relatively unemotional about spending money, where they're just like, this is the amount of money we need to spend to get where we want to go. We're going to allocate it in this way. It's a little bit less of a gut thing. And I think professional CEOs who are used to running larger companies, they have an understanding of like, this is why each function matters. Like, I'm going to find someone who's good at that function and like loose them, on the company, on the market. I've seen this with Dave Clark, the CEO of Triple Lift. I really admire his disposition and his thoughts about marketing. And he just seems to me someone who it's like, he gets it. He's like, perception is reality. Let's hire the people who have the talent required to go like make that vision a reality, and sort of doesn't, enables them and is there to set the strategy with them, but doesn't like get overly hung up on, little roadblocks.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I also think that, with your first company, you make a lot of mistakes and you learn a lot. And where, some of the folks on that list, they're now onto their second or third company, and I've observed them in each stage. I would say that all of these individuals adapt and raise their game with each successive company, with each successive outcome. But those kind of 0 to 1 founder, visionary, product centric CEOs, they're always by nature in the weeds, thinking of market, thinking of product, thinking of bottoms up. And I think that's the key difference.
That's one of the hardest things, right? Is if you have brought a company from 0 to 1 or even 1 to 10, you're going to be a hustler and you are going to be in the weeds because that's what you had to do to get there, right? In the beginning, you were wearing all those hats. But as you go, of course, you need to let go of that. And, your mileage may vary in terms of people's ability to do that.
Yeah, well said. Makes sense.
Now, as a VC, you talk to a lot of people who are early stage CEOs, early stage startup entrepreneurs. How do you gauge potential? Because you're looking for someone with like ideas and talent and vision, but you're also looking for someone who is potentially going to grow with this thing until it's, venture scale to make good on the investment. How do you think about that?
Again, I want to overuse the example, but Bach has this term that he used that I love. It's called sparkly. You get it, right? There's certain individuals that have a sparkle to them.
Yeah.
It's impossible to define, but that's what I look for every single day, right? So some combination of intelligence, extreme, like domain expertise, extreme signs of grit, willing to just like put all the chips on the table, clearly can attract people for investment and joining them, on the journey, right? Like, that the sort of TLDR in this. And again, I'm giving Brian credit for the phrase. You got to look for the sparkle. And if you would go to that list, if you would go to some of the, first time or early stage founders that you've interacted with, we've all interacted with, they got it.
You heard it here first, guys, for Pride Month, no less. What really makes a great entrepreneur is the sparkle. Yeah, I think it's a combination of grit, vision, and charisma.
Yeah. Because the job function, it scales over time. But what are you doing? You're selling investors, you're selling new hires, you're selling customers. You're increasingly becoming more focused on hiring and scaling the team over time. If you don't have that just convincing way about you and that, not a new phrase, right? Like the reality distortion field that so many of these like great CEOs have, it's an absolute.
In terms of the go-to-market attitude, I think the sparkle, if you will, is a big part of that, right? Because successful CEOs, they're very often market facing. They're good at building brands, especially nowadays. The personal brand is increasingly intertwined with the brand of the company. And another term you've told me about is the idea of like a CEO who's also a convener. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Again, sort of in preference, we were talking about this topic and I thought about, some of these standout examples, and they're always market facing, both from like a evangelical and, sort of general mode. They're very market facing from a customer centric lens. Like if you talk to some of these individuals and ask how it's going, and many of them are on to their next startup and they're doing it right now, invariably they're talking about like customers, they're talking about product, so it's one of the same. And if I take a step back and I think about, examples, right, of like AppNexus and Moat and LiveRamp, at a certain point, they started to build a ecosystem around them. So, and again, this predates a lot of the listeners, but every year those three companies would have like a legit summit. AppNexus' summit was big. I mean, it was like, I don't know, probably a couple thousand people. LiveRamp and Moat were a degree smaller, a little bit more senior level focus. I was like flying out to San Francisco for Ramp Up, which was, what LiveRamp Summit came to. So they had, the pattern that I'm seeing is a lot of them had this ability to, kind of like create a movement around them, create, this attraction of the industry and, sort of aligning everybody around a vision to the extent that they were, creating content, creating events and convening an industry around a singular topic. For Moat, it was typically around this idea of attention that they pioneered. For Ramp Up, it was all things, data and identity. And I thought it was really interesting. And a lot of them sort of pioneered this idea of in-person events that were not, led by industry or trades, but actually led by companies and, sort of pioneers of this idea of going direct, of building a channel directly to customers. So, very sort of market centric, very market facing, understood the value of building brand and understood the value of, getting people together.
I think the key word in what you said is movement, because I think great CEOs have a way of not just being like, my customer has a problem and I'm solving it with X. They're like, there is a status quo in this industry that is deeply wrong and offensive to me. And my company exists to solve that problem. So if you think about like Benioff is like a perfect example of that, right? With Salesforce, where it's like,
Dreamforce.
like
Dreamforce at scale, like a giant event.
Exactly. And they had like in their early days, they had like the no software like logo, I think it was, where it was like, that circle with a line through it, like where they're really saying like enterprise software is fundamentally broken and we're going to create a new way, which is, delivering software through the cloud and the birth of SaaS. Now, I think like not every business is going to have the potential of like a Salesforce or like creating SaaS, right? But you need to find a way to articulate your problem, the problem you're solving, as more than just like, well, people have this problem and we come in and sort of our software is different in these 2 or 3 ways. And like, we make it a little better. It has to be like something is like deeply wrong and I'm going to fix it. And you can create a culture around that, because if you're solving that kind of problem, you're also tapping into something that's really visceral for your customers.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to operate at Salesforce scale to be a convener. Right? There's customer advisory boards. There's ways to do this and, have the right people join the movement, regardless of, the scale that you're operating at, and doing it earlier, is typically better.
And these two things go together. So in terms of the go-to-market orientation, we talked about creating a movement and having charisma and solving a problem that's bigger than just your product. And then being, I would say, customer obsessed. Right. And again, the two go together, because if you have that movement, you're fighting on behalf of your customer who's being wronged by someone else. So another concept that people often talk about in that category is the enemy, right? Like in Salesforce's case, like software itself was the enemy and they were, disrupting software. But, it can be all sorts of things. But basically something is deeply wrong. There is an enemy. The status quo is the enemy. And you are working on behalf of your customers to fix it. And your customers are going to come along for the ride.
And at some point, this idea of a movement becomes the invention of a new category, which again, if you go back to that list, a lot of the founder CEOs, you credit them with inventing categories that end up being foundational for the space that ends up becoming, multi-$100 billion.
Is there anything specific we want to say about product, building an engineering team and vision in that category?
Yeah. And I realize it's a very, go-to-market marketing sales centric podcast. And, we probably default a little bit too much to that. All built incredible products, right? That's the most important thing. If there was, no awesome differentiated product to sell, we would not know the names of these CEOs. We would not know the names of these businesses. And I think the other thing is they all, to a fault, built incredible engineering organizations, incredible teams. And, if you sort of were recruiting at this time, like, an engineer coming out of AppNexus, an engineer coming out of LiveRamp, like that resume goes to the top of the stack. So like incredibly performant and well-regarded engineering teams, and, had an excellent, I think, process for recruitment.
Yeah, sorry, engineers. You guys rule the tech world, generally speaking. So this is my chance to one-up you with the marketing and sales talk. It's interesting. Like, I think often in ad tech, and obviously this is a truism about business in general, and I think it's correct. Like, the best product doesn't always win. But maybe if we're talking about like giant successes, like, I wonder if there's a correlation between like giant successes and having a truly better product, or if it's just like a combination of course timing and like they were just that much better in their go-to-market strategy. So for example, like why did the Trade Desk win relative to other DSPs? The story I often hear there is that they really went after agencies, and like a lot of DSPs tried to go past agencies and they were like, the agency is our hero and we're going to, exalt them. And, the rest is history. I'm sure it's a vastly reductionist account,
but there's
but I don't
something
know.
to it.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. Again, we're naming, 4 or 5, companies consistently that are just the extreme outliers, right? TTD, I don't know what the market cap is today. It's in the tens of billions, right? And, all these other companies had 9, 10-figure outcomes. So I think it's a combination of everything. It's, an excellent product. It is like just nailing it in terms of timing. It is being first or defining the market. And then it's like amazing execution in terms of go to market and hiring and marketing and product and everything like that. But yeah, the best product often isn't the one that's the winner in the market, because a product without all these other component parts, it's just a product, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can all agree at the very least, like the product needs to be just about as good as the other products in the market, right? And then it needs to have something different about it, right? Because it's very hard to win on marketing and sales if you don't have some differentiator to hang your hat on. So It needs to be functional and it needs to have a differentiator.
It needs to be awesome. You can't put marketing sheen on everything. Like the product needs to be awesome. You need to have an excellent product and engineering organization. What I'm saying is the common thread across all of these disproportionate outcomes is they were just like excellent at it all.
Yeah, I think the thing is there are a lot of products that are like commodities, but they're still very good at accomplishing what they do. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like a DSP as a DSP, and then some of them, they have like certain differentiators. But I mean, yeah, it's table stakes. If the thing don't work, if it's not effective at doing what it does, and if it doesn't keep up with the other products in the category, you're not going to keep your customers.
Yeah, no, exactly. So much of it is timing, right? It's that product is meeting the needs of the market in the direction that the market is moving, and, in a growing market at the exact moment.
Oren Hoffman from LiveRamp, whom you mentioned earlier, did this great blog post where he was looking back on the LiveRamp acquisition.
Epic blog post. When and if we ever have show notes, like put this at the top.
Yeah, I'll do that. And he mentioned as a key part of LiveRamp's success and ultimate longevity, the team they built, and how so many people he analogized it to PayPal, and so many people from the LiveRamp team went on to be, CEOs in their own right and second-time founders and so on. You built a company of, I think, a couple thousand people. What do you think makes a great CEO from a team and talent perspective?
A few things. Number one, they understand how hiring is everything, like extremely early. And they go through the first-time CEO process of making a lot of mistakes extremely early. And they realize how bad it can be if you're not good at it, and they get great at it. So all of these folks and all great CEOs end up being, number one, great recruiters personally, and they spend a lot of time on recruiting. And then number two, build these functions in their companies, oftentimes earlier than is needed, earlier than, you might get advice from a market perspective. And what I mean by function, like a people organization, training, all of the stuff that goes into, I think making, the highest performing organization. Like they're typically A, awesome at it, B, build the systems and people in place to drive that function forward and like make it a center of excellence a little bit ahead of the market. And yeah, I think it's a point of pride for any founder, any CEO to be able to point to where, some of you are like people that you hired along the way, where they've ended up from a leadership perspective. Like, there's a few folks at Undertone that like have gone on to like incredible roles, like Jay Askenazi. I point one out. He's got the big ad revenue job, oversees all ad revenue for Roku. We hired him as basically a customer success manager, and just, he basically took over the company over the course of like 7 or 8 years. And it's just amazing to see. And I think, again, if you look at all of these companies, Moat, AppNexus is definitely AppNexus, right? Ari worked at AppNexus, LiveRamp, they all have this common thread of there's a little bit of a mafia that is in incredible places, to this day.
And speaking of product, I think people play a tremendous role in obviously making a great product, but also in the service that tends to go along with product in many ad tech companies. And when I talk to ad tech companies' customers, if you ask them, why do you love this company? Which presumably I'm talking to them because they're a good customer of my client, they will say the people almost always, right? Like service makes a huge difference. So it's not just true for your executive team and all of that. It's true for the entire org and people who fulfill the service, customer success people, sales people, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I think also the ability to retain people can be a differentiator, because something I've also heard from ad tech customers is they'll say, like every vendor wants to be a partner, right? And part of what makes them feel like a vendor and not a partner, if that's the case, is the churn of people, right? It's like they're dealing with someone and then someone's doing the implementation, and then 6 months later, they've got a new person. Customers really appreciate when their like CS folks, the people making the product actually work and helping them get the most out of it, are the same across years. And I think if you can keep those people for years, like it's a remarkable standard in the industry.
Which again, it rolls up to this idea of one of the common threads across all these folks is they make it a priority. They personally get excellent at it. They build the function internally. They have relationships with customers. So if there is, any interruption, like the customers, have the direct line, the most important customers, senior level customers, have the direct line to the senior level people up to the CEO at the business. They all get it. They all get that this is a people business, both internally and externally as well.
And I think you see that a lot from companies in terms of, do they view people as almost like, pawns on a chessboard, or like even a necessary evil in parts? It's like, well, we'd love to do it without having to pay these people, but we have to pay them. So let's find, the cheapest people possible to get the job done. Or is it more like, we're building something great here, bigger pie? What, you're making a face.
Have you interacted with companies in the former?
I mean, I run an agency, so I talk to people who are the former not infrequently. I think it's especially from the agency versus full-time employee standpoint, because a lot of the time, the reason they're coming to an agency in the first place, this is fair to some extent, is they're like, hey, this is a resource I can sort of, add and then cut. And I think it's part of like an agency's life cycle that as you get more established, you start saying, okay, well, I'm just not going to do this if that's what you're looking for. Like if you're just looking to plug a temporary hole, I'm way less likely to do that now than I was, a couple of years ago. I mean, think about customer success people, to go back to that example. I would bet there are a lot of companies that view customer success people as like, well, this is very logistical, and like, we're just gonna, we just need to get people and sort of like plug the holes in the boat, right? And I think the organizations that from the top down foster a culture where that's really not the case, and it's like, bigger pie for everyone. I think those people, those organizations are really setting themselves up to succeed.
Yeah. Again, I'm making strange faces because you're saying things that like, if I heard that, like, whew, I would be out the door. And certainly it would be a red flag from an investment standpoint. I mean, the function of the customer success organization is to make customers happy. And you make customers happy by doing the things that, retain them and give you the right to offer them more things. So a customer success function should work with sales and should be at, its ideal, really at its like minimum base case, an area of growth for the company, not like plugging holes. That's just so weird. this mental model.
Let me push a little bit.
Okay.
How long do you think the tenure of an average person in that kind of role in ad tech is? I don't know. I would bet it's not particularly long, right? And so like maybe a year to two. And I don't know, maybe we want to say that's the norm everywhere. So like whatever, that's just, it is what it is. But it does reflect to me like turbulence is, from my vantage point, sort of the norm. And it becomes a question of like, yeah, intentions are good. Like, of course, like if we were writing down, if any CEO is writing down the philosophy, like they're not going to be like, well, we just want to get these people for as cheap as possible and like get this shit done and get out of here with like, slightly higher margins. But I think in practice, it's very hard to keep people and it breaks down a lot.
Yeah, no, we're veering down a direction here, but it ladders up to this idea of, the best CEOs are just, incredible from a hiring and retention perspective. And they have a lot of loyalty. One of the things that, you see when these CEOs start their next company is some of the people that worked for them are their first hires, like right away, right? So they've, cultivated and retained talent. They've maintained relationships with them over time. And, it's not always the same team, going on to the next thing as, sort of getting the band back together. But oftentimes they're bringing their best people along with them for day zero. And those people go, they follow them, right? Which is, I think, the key thing.
I think we will probably do a deeper dive at a later point on like team building and retention and like how you foster a really robust team culture, because I do think it's a perpetual problem, right? Like how do we recruit and retain great people? I mean, there's a reason there are people whose entire job is precisely that. So I'm sure you're out there, superstar AdTech chief people officer, or whatever. So hit us up and we can have a chat on the pod.
That's actually a great idea.
So the last thing I think would be any final notes on like fostering that culture. I mean, I think we talked about like a CEO who has a vision, who has charisma, who believes in people and prioritizes recruiting as one of their key capabilities in the company's differentiators. Do you have any other notes you want to hit on that before we close?
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's a common thread. All of those companies had, incredible culture that I think, helped with recruiting, help with retention, help with getting people marching in the same direction. And I think a great CEO from a culture standpoint, they own it. They're the ones that are, I think, purposefully talking about the mission, talking about the values, hiring, accordingly. B, a lot of these folks I know would spend a lot of time communicating internally and using different channels. Like some would just like write a lot of emails internally, just, again, just sort of like reinforcing all of that stuff. Some of them would do, frequent all hands. Some of them would, sort of like have like bigger things like company summits. So the best CEOs ultimately end up being these builders and stewards of incredible cultures that when they do it right, transcends themselves, right? And it becomes the company culture. It becomes, this is why I love to work at this company. This is why this company is a winning company and a winning team. Again, like having, the benefit of observing them at times over like multiple companies, they get better and better at this, but they also prioritize this type of thing from day one because they've seen when it goes right, when you build this thing right, it just becomes so much more of a tailwind for getting things done faster and better. So again, it's interesting in that if you talk to some of these folks today, and hopefully we'll have some of these folks on the pod in later days, it's like customers and product and market and team and culture, like they're all saying a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, something that really resonates with me is the way that greatness in CEOs or best practices foster an alignment between the internal and the external, right? Like all of this, like the charisma, the vision, the culture, like the same things that make you successful from an external standpoint, I think if they're working really well, also make you successful internally. Like people externally are saying, hey, that company has a really clear vision and they're doing something really ambitious. And like, this is what they stand for and whatever. And that's obviously going to help you a ton from a marketing and sales perspective, but it also like gets everyone internally aligned and gets you the talent you need to get the job done.
Yeah, it's not an accident. And, oftentimes, we talk about on this pod, like, you need to be out there consistently. You need to be like reiterating the message in different channels and frequently. It's the same thing internally. The only way your team understands the mission, how it's tracking against the mission, the position of the company is just like constant internal communication. And again, that's the CEO and they own it. And oftentimes, again, they prioritize this stuff with their next company and it pays off.
And it's truer the bigger your organization is, I think, because if you're a 5-person startup or even a 50-person startup, the CEO can move so much product on their own or create so much pipeline through their own presence. I mean, it's still a factor as you get bigger, but you also need to mobilize, potentially hundreds or thousands of people to get the job done across, sales, marketing, product, and so on. So it all comes down from the top.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This was fun, Joe.
All right. I'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.